welcome back to day 2 of our Enlightenment Notes. Remember that you can pause these or skip ahead to wherever you need at home. We are starting with Voltaire today. Remember, he was known as the most famous of all the philosophes. He was the one that they asked for at every single salon party because he was so brilliant. He wrote all kinds of stuff, from plays to essays, poetry, philosophy, you name it, he wrote it. Remember that he was the guy that wrote satires, right? What is a satire? To make fun, right? And in particular, he made fun of 3 people, basically, or 3 groups. He made fun of the nobility, he made fun of the government, and he also made fun of the church, and really attacked the fact that they were intolerant of freedom. Like, the church says you're going to hell for this, or the king said you have to do this, and you don't have a voice in your vote, or whatever. So he really attacked them, but they tolerated it because they wanted to show that they were enlightened, if you remember that. Now, one of the things he is really known for is this particular quote, kind of a famous one. He said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Now, if I'm writing a quote on the board, you know dang well it's going to be on the test, right? So make sure that you know these quotes. So if you look at this, in a nutshell, what does that quote mean? Yes, which we call in our country freedom of free speech. You got it. This is the beginning of free speech. So for example, could I stand up in the middle of town and say, I hate black people? Can I do that? Yeah, and there may be repercussions. I might get fired, I might get beat up, but do I have that right in this country to say that? I do. Can I say that I'm a Nazi, a part of the Nazi party? Can I do that? Yep. In our country, we say that that's okay. Now, there may be repercussions for it. So my question to you is this. Yes, we believe in free speech in our country, but at what point does it become not free speech? When is it not okay? Okay. Now, you can be sued, but especially when it threatens. I might make somebody feel bad by saying, I hate all girls that have blonde hair, okay? I might even get fired with my job for saying that. But as far as the law goes, it's when it's a threat to someone else that it becomes a government issue. For example, a few years ago, there was a court case. A guy was sitting in a movie theater, and he decided to yell, fire, in front of everybody. There wasn't a fire, but he yelled fire. And what do you suppose the people did? They ran for the doors, they trampled each other, people got injured, and there have been cases in the past where something like that happens and people actually get killed running for the door. He was brought to court for that, and he said, how can you sue me for this? It is freedom of speech. I can yell fire when I want. And they said, no, not when it endangers the life of the people around you. So in that case, he lost that court case. That's an example of that. So like we said, there may be repercussions, but when the government's involved, if there's a threat. So if I stand in the middle of town and I say I hate black people and wear a KKK mask, they might get involved, because could it mean that it's a threat and violence could happen? It could. It could. So in that case, they might intervene. But we do believe in freedom of speech, hopefully. Okay? All right. On to our next slide. By looking at this title, what is it? The very first encyclopedia was written during the Enlightenment. Did you have a question, Hunter? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. To have free speech? Well, he was a part of the French Revolution, right? And they were fighting for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. So in that case, yeah, because they basically created the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, yeah. All right, so let me ask you, if you were alive back in this day and you were making the first encyclopedia ever, who would you hire to write it? And who are the smartest people of that day? You nailed it. Yep, that's what they did. They hired the philosophes to write the articles in the encyclopedia. And this book was made for a really honorable purpose. It's kind of the same reason that we heard about in the Renaissance. Remember, they wanted a Bible for everybody so you could actually look things up yourself? Well, it's the same thing here. These guys, I should probably put their names on the board. Breton, Diderot, looks like Diderot, okay? And D'Alembert, looks like Alembert. They were the guys that put this encyclopedia together. And they said, we believe that all people should be able to have a resource where they can look up things. Because otherwise, you didn't have that resource. It wasn't available to you. It's not like they had internet or they had libraries back then that you could use. So they wanted everybody to have an encyclopedia in their house. You'll notice it took 20 years to put this thing together. I want you to imagine how things have developed over time. In the encyclopedia that we're talking about, it was about as big as this dictionary right here, one book. Everything in the encyclopedia could fit in this one book. And as time has gone along, things have changed a little bit. When I was your age, or well, a little bit younger, this is what we used for an encyclopedia. You ever seen any of you have these sets of encyclopedias in your house? Still? Yeah. And I remember, well, they had to have it small enough that they could fit it in a car because people sold them door to door, but yet we had a lot more information. So if they put something new in, they typically had to take something out because they had to fit it in this set. I remember as a young person, especially in middle school, you know how you have to do reports on giraffes or Africa? I would pray, please, please have Zimbabwe in the encyclopedia, because otherwise, what did I have to do? Where did I have to go? The library. I had to get my butt up and I had to go to the library and research. Right, and find the index card, yep, and hope that there were books in the library about Zimbabwe. So I remember thinking that. Now, look at today. What do you guys use? Oh my gosh, and it's at your tips, isn't it? Your fingertips. You have phones, you have Google, you have computers, and can you imagine how many articles or how many pieces of information are on the internet? It's probably uneven, not measurable, right? Tons of information, and it is right there at your fingertips. Things have changed. You don't have to always go and tromp over to the library to get your information. It's kind of cool. Now, is everything factual? Not always, right? So we have to measure whether it's true or not by looking at maybe more than one site. But things have really changed. So I want you to imagine that you are the people that put this encyclopedia together way back then. If you were those people, what things would make the book? What topics? Go ahead. What topics would make the encyclopedia? Okay, people, famous people. Good. What else? What else? Oh, rulers. Good. What else? Animals. Need that giraffe, right? What else? Come on. Countries. Good. Zimbabwe. What other things would we find in an encyclopedia? Science, inventions. What else? How about plants? How about something up in the sky? Yeah, astrology. Religions. Yes, wars. Famous events. Possibly, possibly. Maybe. So you can see, you know, you kind of have to narrow it down a little bit, But you're right, that's what they did. And they had little illustrations for a lot of this. So if they had a definition of a buffalo, they had a drawing of a buffalo, not a picture, but a drawing. There were, I'll go to the next slide here, 72,000 articles in the first encyclopedia. It's a lot of information to put together. And they were the best of the best because they were the philosophes. Now remember that the encyclopedia is not have anything to do with religion, and especially in the Catholic Church, everything was supposed to be a part of religion. Whether it was a painting or architecture, you were supposed to glorify God in everything you did. This didn't have anything to do with God. So because of that, the Catholic Church actually banned the encyclopedia. Doesn't that seem weird today? But they did, they banned it. Okay, make sure that you have filled in your book on Diderot and D'Alembert for what they did. We'll give you a moment to do that. All right, our next theme is deism. It's one of our vocab words. So I have a question for you. How many of you know someone who believes in God but doesn't go to church because they believe they've been judged or that they're not very nice people? Any of you know someone like that? Raise your hand. Maybe you are one of those people. Yeah, I know people like that too, right? Well, back in that day, they were called deists. We have them today, we just don't call them deists. These were people who believed in God, but remember that the church was very corrupt in this day, and they realized it, so they said, I'm not going to let the church influence my beliefs. I'm going to do it on my own. Now, unfortunately, the people in that day called them atheists. What is an atheist? Where you don't believe in God. And that is not what they were at all. But because their butt wasn't in the seat on Sunday morning, they assumed that they were atheists, and that's not true. What they would do, very enlightened like, they would go and sit in the forest, and they would pray to God by themselves. They would read the Bible by themselves, and they would figure out what they truly believe. And that way you get rid of all the politics of the church. That's what deists were. Now, there was one guy that was really famous for deism, and that is this guy here, a guy named Thomas Paine. He was known for really challenging the corrupt church and going off on his own and using reason to come up with his real belief in God. He also had a couple of theories that are somewhat interesting. He saw God equal to the great watchmaker. And just like a person that makes a fine Swiss watch, if you look inside there and you see all the gears and all the parts, it's pretty amazing what they do. And he saw God like a watchmaker that put all those little parts together to create the world. And then our job was to just keep it running while we're here on earth. So we had a little different theory on that. He also wrote a book called Common Sense. I think some of you maybe studied this in government in 8th grade maybe or something. Yeah. Well, we're going to use a different portion of that book, actually. In that book, Common Sense, he basically says this. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. He said, there is a happiness in deism because you don't have a church telling you what to do. There is a happiness in deism because you don't have a church telling you what to do. Now we're going to give you a moment to reflect a little bit on what we've learned so far. Based on all the philosophes that we have studied up to this point, I want you to decide which one you think you relate to the most or you dig the most and why. And then just write it down by where we ended our notes. And then I'm going to have you share. Okay? I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, our next person is Thomas Hobbes. Now, Thomas Hobbes was interesting because he used reason with governments. He went and he visited all kinds of governments all throughout Europe, and he looked at what worked and what didn't, and he basically came up with what he thought was the best kind of government. And you're going to hear about two guys that did this, actually. He was the first. One of the things that he did is he wrote a book called The Leviathan. Does anybody know what a Leviathan is? Little trivia question. You're really close. It's a big sea monster. Yeah, a Leviathan is a big sea monster, which I think is interesting. He used this title because when you think of the government as a big monster, that's kind of what he thought. So it kind of fits. It'll be easy to remember for your test. He first of all attacked the divine right of kings. What was the divine right of kings, as a reminder? God chose you to be God, right? He said that that is a bunch of bull. He said the people choose their leader. Now remember, he studied lots of governments. And in a democracy, that's obvious because we vote and we elect a representative for our president, okay? But he said that happens even in a monarchy. God has nothing to do with it because if they don't like a king, what do people do? They cut off his head, they overthrow him, right? So people ultimately are allowing that person to remain in power or to kick him out and kill him. So ultimately, you're the ones that choose that king or queen no matter what. Yeah. A mix of monarchy and democracy. That's a good, I'm trying to think of the word. Actually, when we look at, later on, we'll look at the French government, and it's got a really interesting mix. When I get to that, we'll talk a little more about it, okay? Because you're right, we do have a mix, like in England, for example. You have that. France does too, only they're a little bit different. But yeah. Okay, so here's the thing that's weird about him, and he was in your chapter, last chapter. He does believe that kings are too powerful, right? And ultimately, we decide who's a king or queen. But he supported a strong monarchy. He said people have to have a king or a queen, a strong leader. You have to have a strong leader. And this is why. Because we are a passionate people. We are driven by our emotions, and there are times when things get a little out of hand because we're emotional. And it's during those times we need a leader to grab the reins and tell us it's going to be okay. I'll give you a great example. 9/11. I know, how old were you guys when 9/11 happened? What? Oh my gosh, I'm so old. Oh my gosh. Okay. But seriously, I remember when that happened. I was standing right down here in the hallway, and a TV was on in the high school office. And I walked by, and just then the second plane hit the tower, and they realized that it really was a terrorist attack. Okay? I'll never forget how it just felt like our world crumbled. Everybody was calling their husbands, their wives, are you okay? We wanted to just stop working, stop going to school. We wanted to go and be with our loved ones. My husband was ready to go over and kill whoever did it. You know, I mean, our world was falling apart. Our airlines completely shut down for good reason at that time. But even after that, people were afraid to fly because of what had happened. It took a leader to grab the reins and say, we're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And without a strong leader, we would be a mess. So that's why he says that that's important. So we're driven by our passions. That's why we need a strong leader. Okay? Now, he also talked about a couple other things, too. You can imagine how the kings did not like him very much because he was obviously attacking that they were corrupt or using their power too much. But he basically said, people, if you don't like it, take him out. Take him out. It's your job to control who controls our country. And in our own country, we have a stipulation. Do you know that in our own documents, it says that we have a right to overthrow our own president? Yeah. Yeah. It says that if they are not protecting us and not doing a good job, we have the right and the duty to overthrow our government. That's coming up pretty quick here. Pretty cool. All right, our next guy is John Locke. John Locke, you maybe have heard of him before. He had a couple of brilliant theories. The first one is called the state of nature, and you maybe have heard of this in science. Not sure. You ever heard this at all? Okay. All right. This is what he believed. In the state of nature, he believes that all people should be equal. Guy, girl, black, white, purple, green, everybody should be equal. Now, that's not a new concept. We've heard this before. But the reason why he says all people should be equal is the interesting part. He applied it to science because he was a scientist. And he said, okay, let me use you as an example. All right, Drew, you're a guy, right?
Yeah.
I'm a girl, right? Okay. Are we the same species?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Human. Yeah.
We're human species?
Yeah.
So you're telling me you're not like an ape and I'm not a frog?
Yeah.
So then why should we be treated any differently if we're the same species? We shouldn't be, right? Same thing. Oh, let's see here. Ricky, I am African American. You are?
Is it because I'm brown?
It's because you could be any color, okay?
Oh.
Just because we're a different color, does that make us a different species?
No.
No, we're still the same species. So why in the world, in the United States, at this time, would we not allow African Americans to have equality? He said it's stupid. And remember, this is the 1700s. We didn't give African Americans equal rights until the 1860s. This guy was way ahead of his time. And he basically applied it to science. He looked at this thing. Remember when you studied, species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, all that? Humans are all in the same species. So there is no reason why we should not all be treated the same. Very logical, like Spock on Star Trek, Very logical. The second thing he came up with was a thing called tabula rasa. And if you take psychology, you're going to hear about tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means the blank slate theory. Oops, spelled that. Blank slate theory. This is what he did. He studied babies, little babies, newborn babies, so cute. And he looked at how they learned. And he said that all babies are born with a blank slate. They have an empty slate. And that's why it's so important that we educate all people. Because we all start with the same blank slate. So is it fair that we get to fill up his slate, but not hers? It isn't. So that's why we should educate all people. Now, you'll hear about this in psychology because even today, some people believe babies are born with a blank slate. Because how do we test the knowledge of a newborn, right? They can't write, they can't speak, they can't read. But there was another psychologist that came up later that actually has the opposite view. He believes that some babies are born with certain knowledge. Otherwise, how do you explain that this kid can read when he's 1 year old and I can't read till I'm 5? Or why can this person be a genius at the piano and not this person? That we're born with certain knowledge based on our parents.